Everyone. Welcome to yet another workshop for the monthly challenge. This time it's for the Onyx data. And yeah, before we go on, of course, a few questions to you guys. What I would like to know is have you already started to work on the data set? What are your thoughts about it? Any interesting, let's say, conclusions based on this 100% realistic data set have you already made? But yeah, the main question is have you already started to work on this? If so, if you have faced any challenges, something that I might try to cover during the workshop as well. Because remember, the main thing about these workshops is it's a time where you can always ask your questions. And it's the other part is that this is the opportunity for me to kind of showcase some of the visuals, showcase some of the calculations or Power Query sort of data transformations that I think are going to be useful for you during the analysis itself. Sure, not going to cover everything as much as I would like to. There's just not enough time, but I'll try to cover as much as possible. So yeah, hello everyone. For those of you who have been here before, you know how it's going to go down. For those of you who are new here, just a quick rundown of things. So, the main idea about this workshop is this is the time of the month where we go through the data set. We talk about the data set itself, we talk about some of the transformations in the Power Query, some things that I think you should take into considerations when, for example, creating the reports or combining certain values or connecting the data model or anything. So, basically, I try to give as much input from my side as possible. That's one part of it. The other part is, of course, it's a report. So things have to be visualized. So the other part is I'm going to be showcasing some of the visualizations, how I think they could be set up, some interesting formatting options, something that you can at least take into account, right? It's not that you have to recreate this. It's just some ideas that you could play around with. And of course, at the end, we're going to have, if we're going to have any questions, we're going to have a Q&A session where I'm going to try to answer as many of them as possible. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and I'm going to try to respond to every single one of them. Ivis, I'm almost, Vyacheslav said, Ivis, I'm almost done, but it keeps bothering me. Gender. I haven't tested the gender column yet, but I'm sure I'll see some interesting things then, probably. All right. One more thing before we go to the dataset itself. I'm quickly going to also share my screen. And what I wanted to quickly showcase is just in case there's somebody else in the audience who hasn't yet started to create the report or doesn't know how to participate, I'm going to quickly showcase you where you can get the dataset, how you can register, and a few other things. So let's see. Push is live. Perfect. So if you go to our website, zoomcharts.com, you're going to be greeted with the JavaScript and Power BI world. This is, of course, regarding Power BI. So you open up Power BI, top menu challenges, just click on it, and you find the one that you want to participate in. Right now, we're talking about the Onyx data. So you click on Learn More. Top right, you're going to have a submit, well, essentially a registration form at first. So if you already have a Microsoft account, if you're using organizational account, you can register through that. That's fine. Or you can use your personal emails. Now, once you register, let me just sign in with my Microsoft ID. I have, of course, you see, the first one, I want to register. Of course, I want to register. I'm going to be participating. Not, I can't. We're forbidden from participating in these. But the two important things that you get here, well, there's actually three things. So, first of all, is this is where you can get your developer's license. Now, some of you already might have this. For those of you who don't have this, the developer's license is our way to give you access to every single one of our custom custom visuals. So there's currently 11 different custom visuals available on the app source, and most of them have even two versions. There's a pro and a pin version. So all the features, all the customizability, everything is given to you for free. That's a great benefit. Of course, there are some limitations on how you can use this license, right? That's meant for challenges and so forth. You can't really use it in your commercial reports. Standard rule set, basically, right? But we don't ask you any money from you if you just want to play around with the visuals, if you want to use them within the challenge reports and so forth. So you can play around with these, and we're giving you all the access to it. Second thing, this is where you submit your report. Now, regarding the submission, one thing I always want to reiterate and remind you guys, you don't have to wait till the very last moment of the challenge deadline. If you submit your report whenever you feel comfortable with it, doesn't necessarily mean that you're fully finished with it. Let's say this is version one that you want to submit and get some feedback. Because one of the things that our team does for you is we go through all the submissions and we send personalized feedback. We're telling you, hey, might consider this. Hey, take a closer look at this part. This seems confusing. Hey, pay attention to the value formatting and so forth. So we give you certain pointers on how to improve the reports even before the final deadline, right? It's not just after it. So if you submit your report, you're going to get some additional feedback, which allows you to improve your report and have better chances at winning the whole thing. So don't forget to always submit, get the feedback, and improve, right? Don't wait till the very last moment. Because it's the very last day. I mean, you can probably understand it as well from our side, right? If it's the last few hours of the deadline, and what happens, this is just human psychology. Everybody submits at the very last moment. So we're getting a lot of submissions at the same time. We just can't humanly go through all of them simultaneously, right? There is a resource there's allocated to these sort of things. So if you send it a little bit earlier, you have a little bit more time to also improve and make a better report. Once you have the license, once you submit the report, or even actually before you submit the report, there's another thing that you have here. If you scroll down a bit, you're going to see that get the dataset. So this is where you can get the dataset. Since this challenge is in cooperation with Onyx Data, the challenge dataset is hosted on their side. So there are a few things you have to do here as well. You have to register for their community, and then you're going to be able to download the dataset. Don't pay attention to my internet speed today. It just decided it's going to be a little bit slow. The weather is raining, and it is what it is. So the dataset is here. Also, another reminder that you have your license. That's the developer's license. And another thing that you can utilize are the one-on-one sessions. So if you have just small little questions or even a bigger questions, or just get stuck on something, want to get my feedback on certain things, you have the opportunity to book these sessions. Of course, it is based on my actual availability. So there might be days where I have not a single time slot available. There might be few days when I don't have anything. But whenever I do have a slot, feel free to register, sign up for it, and let's talk about it. So you have a lot of these opportunities. You have a lot of resources also, as you can see here. There's documentation, report examples. You can even go to challenge page and scroll down a bit lower. Right here, you have the full archive of the previous challenges. You can get some inspiration from there. So there's a massive amount of information that you can also go through if it's needed. Right? If it's the first challenge that you want to take to part of, I'd say look at some of the previous ones. Just get the feeling of how things are looking, what we're doing here, and so forth. The other thing that I would recommend you to do is, if you haven't participated in one of the challenges previously, under resources, there's also an option for webinars. And the one that I would recommend is any of the top 5 announcements. So the top 5 announcement webinars is where we go through reports and we talk about what we like about them, what we think could be done a little bit better, what what should be improved and so forth. So that gives you a better feeling of what are the things that we're noticing and looking at. So take all that in consideration and create an amazing report. So good luck on that. Now for the dataset challenge right now. So if we go to Onyx Data, let's quickly do that. Actually, I'm just going to go to the folder. So in the folder itself, what you're going to have is a cheat sheet. You're going to have a description of the challenge and so forth. But the most important part is right? It's the Excel file. The Excel file that has all the data. Now, within this Excel file, I'm going to quickly open it up as well. You can see we actually have 4 different tables. We have fact set, which is the fact table. We have 2 additional dimensions, one for product, one for location, and we have a data dictionary. Don't neglect the data dictionary, right? If you're not the owner of the data set and you haven't created it, there sometimes might be confusion as to what column represents what, right? So keep it in mind that you have this if you get confused about what certain columns are representing. So just something to keep in mind. Now, once we load everything into Power BI, let's go ahead and open up the Power Query. So you can see I loaded in everything. I even loaded in the data dictionary. I've said this before. The reason why I do this during the challenges is because you can afterwards, of course, remove it or hide it. That's completely fine. The reason why I do it is so that I don't have to look for the original Excel file, open that up, look at the dictionary. Everything is within the PBIX file already for me, right? So if I want to look at certain terminology or definition of a column. If I have all data loaded in, like for example, right here where it's loaded in, I can just open up the table view, find the data dictionary and be like, okay, I was looking for customer gender. Okay, customer gender. Operating system for the phone. Okay, got it. Right? This is just one way on how you can quickly check things. You don't necessarily have to keep it here forever. Once you're done with the report, you can also delete it. But whilst you're creating reports, just do things that allow you to essentially create the initial report at least as fast as possible. Give me a second. All right. So, what else? If we go back to Power Query. Now, one thing that you're going to notice is, and actually, let me open up a new Power BI file for this because I already created a model on this one, but I just want to load the data completely from the scratch again. So it's going to be a blank report. My data set is going to be the Onyx data set. Come on, there we go. Creating, establishing connection. Sure, I'll keep the data dictionary out this time. I'm going to load in the data, not transforming anything right now. If there's going to be any errors, I can fix them afterwards. But there's one thing that I want to showcase. So if we go to the data model, you can see that we have the fact table, right? You can see in product dimension, there's probably first row is header, something needs to be pushed up. But we have a connection with the locations, but we don't have a connection with the products. Okay, so initial thought processes, well, I'm just going to make one here as well, right? So the first thing that I would probably do, and this is what I did already, is I'm going to go back to the Power Query. I'm going to find the dim dimension product, and I can see, okay, yeah, first row as headers, so I'm going to push it upwards. This means that I'm just pushing the first row to be used as headers for the table. There we go. Cool. I'm going to say maybe that's the only issue. Now I'm going to see the column names and I'm going to be able to create a connection. And then I start to look at things, right? So we have a brand, cool, color, yeah, so forth, so forth, so forth. But the main issue is you don't really have a unique column, right? Because we have, for example, a brand, but we might have multiple mobile models underneath the same brand. So there's going to be many. On this side, there's also going to be many. Many to many is a relationship that you can, of course, create right here. Many to many, cross filter direction, both, for example. So you can physically create that connection. But with many to many, you have to be very cautious because this is something that can affect a lot of DAX calculations. And what might end up happening is essentially you might have cases where you have more values that were expecting, you have lesser values that you were expecting, or sometimes it just works out, right? This basically relationship model allows you to create some data ambiguity. Blah, that's a mouthful. But essentially, it just creates scenarios where things cannot be read and displayed properly, right? It seems that things are working, but behind the scenes, there is some confusion on the data model side. So instead of using this, I started to think, okay, what can I do in order to create that unique ID? And if I go to the original one, the one I already started to work on, and I'm going to open up Power Query here and products. So I have two additional columns. This is what we had originally, all these two I created. So my first attempt was, hey, theoretically, I could just create a column which has basically the brand name plus the model of the phone, right? Seems okay, that should be enough. And I didn't initially go through everything, right? So that was just my first thought process. Okay, I have the manufacturer and I have the model. I'm going to combine those and I'm going to use this as a connection. Okay, there's ID here. I do the same also, of course, for the fact sales because I need to have the same column and values on both sides of the connection, right? There has to be a unique identifier on both sides. So what I did here is, of course, I created the same one. the way on how I created this is you actually have multiple variations on how to achieve this. The way I did this is, I'd say it's one of the lazy approaches, but it's also one of the tricky approaches, and that is, upright in the ribbon, you choose add column, and you choose column from examples. So column from examples, what it essentially means is you can highlight certain columns if you want to, or you can actually do this as well. You can say that, hey, I'm going to be doing this based on, let's see where brand is. So brands here and operating system is right here, or mobile phone number. So if I just highlight two of them, column from examples, and you can see either from all columns or just a selection. So what I did is I don't know exactly what I'm going to be doing right now, so I'm just going to say take everything into account. And the way that this column from an example works is you just have to tell the model what's the expected end result. So in my case, what I was doing is I was saying that, hey, based on the values, I want to say that this column is going to have a value of Google underscore the mobile model. So I'm going to say something like Pixel 8a. Let's say underscore also the storage size. So for example, I want to combine those three, and this is 128 GB. Now, once you hit enter, you can see what happens. Power BI is learning and using machine learning essentially at the backend, right? It's understanding what you're doing with it. It's telling you what formula it's creating in M in order to transform these values. So you're essentially in my case, it's already saying text combine ID column. In your case, you will say brand underscore model and so forth, because I already have this combined ID column. It's just one of the reasons why I have it here. But you can see the formula that I'm essentially using. So this allows you to create these new columns that I can afterwards use for establishing a relationship. Now, I'm just going to cancel that action. So this was my first try, right? I created an ID. But the problem with this is once you go ahead and try to create a relationship, there's going to be the same issue. You're going to have multiple Google Pixel 8a phones because there's multiple colors, there's multiple storage sizes, and so forth. So what I just ended up doing is I created merged column, which basically combines every unique aspect from dimension products. Why dimension products is because this is what allows me to define the unique product ID basically. I can't do this on the fact table because on the fact table we also have things like gender, the dates, and so forth. This is specifically regarding the product. So I just essentially used columns from examples and combined it everything together. You can see it right here if I just extend it. So it just takes everything, right? It takes Samsung, it takes the model, it takes the operating system, it takes the storage size, the color, creates one value for a unique combination of this. Now, once you create this, you do the same approach also on the fact table, because again, remember, you need to have the same value on both sides, right? There might be, in this case, there's actually going to be multiple entrances of the same value, but I need the same principle behind them on both sides. And once I do that, if I go back to the report now in the model view, you can see I also created a date table, but I'm establishing a connection between the products and I'm using the merged column, which is the new column that I created. So this is something that allows you to create a full connection between the models. Of course, data dictionary is not connected to anything because that's just purely definitions. If I wouldn't need it, I can always just hide it right here. And if I go to report, you can see it's not here anymore. So I can still access it in this part, in the table view, but it's not visible when I'm building the reports. So there are ways on how you can things more or less populated, right? So once I created the full data model, in this case, I was like, okay, there's probably going to be the date. That's the next thing that I'm going to be looking at. But right now, I have my dimensions, I have my fact table, I have relationships going all directions where it's necessary. So I can start to create a report. Now, once I started to create a report, of course, one of the things that I do is I first of all just take a look at the facts. And I'll usually just try to understand, okay, what are the things that I have within it that I could start to analyze? That's my approach. For those of you who have a similar approach, happy for you. If not, don't worry. It's not like it's the best approach. It's just the approach that I take. So for those cases where you don't necessarily know what you're going to be doing straight away, what I would recommend to do is don't get too hung up on it. Open up the website, open up the challenge, go to the brief, and right here you can see you have key questions to answer in your analysis. Now, again, for those of you who are new, quick reminder, this does not mean you have to answer every single one of them. No, these are just ideas on things that you could be focusing on. If you want to analyze something that is not on the list, be my guest. If you want to enhance the current data set with additional data that you decided, hey, that could be very interesting, go ahead. You're more than welcome to change the data set, right? What we're trying to do is just give you the base. So everybody has the same starting field. How you go about it, what you create, and how you tackle this is completely up to you. So in the final reports, you're also going to be noticing sometimes people have like additional information added, and you're thinking that wasn't in the data set. Yeah, because you have the opportunity to add it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it gives you additional points or something like that. No, it still depends on how good is the report and how easy I can analyze and try to discover the information. But it's just something that you might want to do. Because at the end of the day, one thing you have to remember is that these challenges and the whole environment, what we're trying to build here is it's a safe place where you can learn, you can try new things, and don't be afraid to fail, right? Winning is not the main goal here. I'd say the main goal for these events is gaining new knowledge. So if you try something and it doesn't work out, well, now you know one of the options of how not to do it. You have the possibility to ask questions. Maybe we have ideas on how you could tackle it and would work, right? Just don't be afraid to try out new things. Don't get too hung up on one single design that, for example, has helped you to create a winning report previously. Try something new. See how, for example, different navigation methods are being applied. See how different field parameter approaches are being utilized, and so forth. Just play around, right? Have fun with this. That is the main idea. And if it's a good report and you like it, add it to your portfolio. Simple as that. Trust me, most companies nowadays, they're not just checking your knowledge as typically you would have in schools, right? Answer A, B, or C. It's not just that about Power BI. When it comes to Power BI, one of the skills that people are looking for is actually the ability to create the reports. It's one thing to know the theoretical part of it, it's a completely different thing to know the practical side of things. How to make even a basic report, not everybody understands it. They know all the theoretical parts of it, but building a report is difficult. So just enhance your skills. Think about it like that. So let's go back to the report. This is going to be the Power Query. No, I need the actual report. Kudos. Now, once I start to play around with the visuals and everything, right, I'm most typically always try to look, okay, is there any sort of timeline? Most of the times, almost every single report is going to have some sort of a time dimension to it. Whether it's going to be all the way down to a day or hour or minute, sometimes it's just years, months, really depends on the situation. In our case, we actually have data going down to a daily level. So, my first thought process, of course, are okay, means that I'm going to have a timeline. Within the timeline, in my case, what I also did is because I know I'm also going to be creating DAX calculations, and a lot of data intelligence that is built within Power BI requires you to have a separate calendar table to calculate things properly. So that's what I did next. I created a date dimension, or basically a dimension calendar. There are multiple ways, again, on how you can handle this. You could just go ahead online and say Power BI DAX calculated calendar sample. Look at some of the YouTube videos, see some blog posts, or for example, how to do this. You can see there's a couple of DAX functions and so forth. There's always multiple options on how to do this, right? You can also see how, for example, um, Alberto is doing it, for example, what's he taking into account? What are the things he's saying that you should consider, and so forth. If not, in my case, I kept it quite simple. I just went to modeling, new table, and what I did is I just wrote a DAX formula. I'm just going to increase the size of this a little bit. So, what I used is a calendar formula, and calendar requires a starting date and a finish date. In my case, I went with the fact sales transaction minimum, and then I could actually just switch it out as well here, and I'd say that it's actually the transaction date because I didn't know how much time, let's say, time difference is going to be in between it. Because when I was looking at the data originally, if I go right here, you can see that we have this transaction date, and I can see it starts from different days, like for example 3rd of January and so forth. End of month is always going to be the last date of the month, and I didn't know if on the last month where we have the data, I'm going to have data for every single day. So I just wanted to make sure that I have in the calendar table as such all the way to the max date, right? So for example, if the last date in my fact table would be 16th of December, I want to make sure that my calendar table has all the data up until the 31st of December, right? So there is full continuity in the data set. There's no missing parts of it. So that's why I initially used the end of month. But if we take a closer look at it, I think if we scroll down, we can see we actually do have it up to 31st of December. So different approaches, right? My first thought process, yeah, I'm just going to use this. I'm too lazy to check and so forth, but it's not necessarily the greatest approach. As for the visual, now once I have the dimension date, I can just use the built-in hierarchy right here. As for the date value, I could use it from the dimension table, but I can also use the transaction date, which is the date that I used for the connection. So that's one. And then units sold as my value. Units sold, super difficult to actually calculation, guys, right? It's just a sum function. So not everything has to be very difficult. Just sum, tell which value to sum up. That's it. So once I do that, you can see that, okay, we have data for 2024, right? Cool. Looking at this one massive column seems kind of redundant, right? Because it doesn't matter how much data you have within it, it's just going to be a single year. So one of the things that a lot of people do is remember there are certain toolbar items which allow you to manipulate how it looks currently. Like for example, I can say that, hey, actually, come on, tooltip, disappear. There we go. Right here, you have it on yearly granularity. However, I can easily switch it, for example, to a monthly granularity. But this only changes how basically how the chart is being perceived right now. If I switch pages and come back, I'm going to be back to that one massive column. So what you can do from a formatting option perspective is go into them, open up a property called initial display unit. Open that up and you can see that the mode by default is top. Means that it's looking at the hierarchy that you have here and it's using the top unit. You also have the option of going to the bottom unit or right here, top, bottom, or custom. If you choose custom, what the visual does for you is it shows you all the units that you have available, and you just turn on the unit that you want to use as the default one. So in my case, I'm going to say, hey, I want to see everything on a monthly granularity. So now, if I switch between the pages, everything is going to be always on a monthly granularity. If I also decide to, for example, put on the reset button. So reset button is an indicator that something is being filtered or if you want to get back to the initial state. This is my initial state, right? If I decide to drill down into one of the months, you can see a reset appears. And if I click reset, it's always going to be taking me back to that monthly granularity because that is the initial unit that I have defined, right? So think about the user experience and how he's looking at the data, how he's, for example, interacting with it. What can he do with it? Can it create, for example, confusing situations and so forth? When it's just a single visual, not always you have all your answers. This is why you double check the visuals from time to time once you add another thing on the page. A great example of this. I'm going to go to page one. I think I had this. Date field, no. Page three? No, it actually was here, but I'm just going to switch it to a hierarchy. There we go. Because, it would be weird if there's just an error there. So you can see, for example, what I've done here. This chart is supposed to showcase the top 10 products by units sold. And the hierarchy that I have created within the chart is brand and that merged, which is the product ID that I created, right? So it seems okay at the very first glance, but the problem here is that if I decide to, for example, go for something like this, I'm going to say, hey, I want to focus. We know that under iOS, there's only going to be one, right? But it just highlights the problem. If I select iOS, again, we have this one massive column of Apple. If I go for Android, okay, we still have few options, but as soon as I choose again one brand, you try to avoid these situations, right? So this is why whenever you're doing analysis, you try to showcase on the charts different dimensions, something that doesn't necessarily overlap straight away, right? You take that into account. Again, you play around with the visuals, you see if you have any filters, how it interacts, how it looks like, and so forth. This is why you're going to hear me, all the guest judges, just reiterate the same thing, right? Because these are the basics. I know some of you already know them. Repetition is the mother of knowledge. There's a saying in Latvian. So you're not going to be, getting worse by this. You're just reminding yourself. Yeah, but yeah, this is one great example. Same vice versa, right? If I choose a brand right here, I'm left with just a single slice right here. And it just seems weird. So try to avoid these situations. So this is something I did on purpose. Now, if we go back to the timeline. So for the timeline and for a lot of our other visuals, there's a lot more functionality that's actually hidden underneath the formatting options. So the one thing that we're trying to always deliver to the customers is we want to make sure that the visuals are flexible when it comes to different setups itself. It supports a lot of different time units, but it also allows you to customize it to your exact needs. If we're missing something, too bad. We might add it later on, right? As much as we would love to cover everything, I think most of you will agree that it's just not humanly possible, right? No worries, Vyacheslav. There is gonna be a recording, so you can be able to watch it later on. But thanks for tuning in. All right. So one more thing that I want to, or actually a few things that I wanted to quickly go through is the use of thresholds. So under formatting options, you have the ability of enabling a threshold. Once you do that and open it up, you can see you can create a constant one, which is okay for certain cases, but for most of the time, it's you want to have it something a little bit more dynamic, right? So the other options that you have here is use one of the aggregations of the value that you're referencing. And let's say in this case we're talking about units sold. So what I would want to highlight is actually the average value across the whole column, across the whole year. I'm going to also enable the label, for example. It's going to be 2K. That's fine. I'm going to remove the display units. I don't want to have millions or thousands or forth. I just want to see the whole number. You can also add additional text. So say this is the average units sold. So let's say, for example, per month or something like that. For now, I'm just going to keep it average units sold. Now, since I have this threshold, and the reason why I wanted to have it is because underneath series configuration, which is the option of configuring how your values are being showcased, I'm going to enable conditional formatting. Initially, conditional formatting is set based on this series and the average value. So the reason why I wanted to have that threshold, because this is the line that it's basically defining the cutting point, right? If it's above it, it's going to be in green. If it's below it, it's going to be in red. You can also do other things. You can use one of the other aggregation mechanisms, or you can reference a constant value, or you can reference also another series. So you could have theoretically something in your data set that allows you to achieve the wanted result. So, for example, in my case, what I would want to have is, hey, if this month's sales, or actually this week's sales, is I think what I created as a sample. Yeah. If this week's sales are better than the previous week, I want to highlight it in green. Otherwise, it's in red, right? If it's worse, then it's in red. So what I did is just to showcase how it looks like. I think I had it in this page. This is the current one. This is the week. Yeah. Here, I'm just going to enable the hierarchy and remove day. There we go. So you can see this essentially looks at the previous value. So if the value of increase is positive, then you see right here. You can also put it up on focus mode so it's a little bit easier. I'm gonna go here. You can see if there's an increase, the column is in red. If there's a decrease, it's sorry, vice versa. If it's an increase, it's in green. If it's a decrease, it's in red. The value for the labels itself. You can also play around with this in multiple form factors. You can place it always at the top of the columns. In my case, what I just wanted to play around with the idea is if it's an increase, I want it to be at the top of the column. If it's a decrease, I actually want to have the value below the line. So that's another way on how you could look at, for example, increases or decreases, right? Because you might not want necessarily to color the whole column. I could go ahead and say that, hey, conditional formatting is actually going to be disabled. But these values is something that allows me to understand whether it's increasing or decreasing. You could, of course, also go ahead and configure the value labels itself. So I could say something like conditionally format, well, either the fonts itself or even the backgrounds, just to kind of emphasize on whether it's an increase or decrease, right? Just think about the visual setup. You don't always have to go for the safe route, right? Which is the default route. You can play around with things, see what interesting approaches you can take here, what new mechanisms you can uncover, because the more you know, the better reports you can create in the future, right? Sure, fully understand that it's very important to learn the basics on the very first tries. Everybody's been there. That's fine. Create simple reports, create visuals that work, that tell a meaningful story, and then only start to enhance them with additional capabilities. Don't try to run before you can walk, right? But if you already know how to walk, might as well see how many different ways you can run. So this is one of the things that I would recommend to play around with. Label styling, the column styling itself, or lines or areas, or how you want to approach this. Because the one thing I think a lot of people do in reports, just because this is sort of their mindset, right? Look, so let's create a new timeline. Let's again go for the date hierarchy. The reason why I removed days from the hierarchy is because I don't need them, but I'm going to be using weeks. And for weeks, I just used, again, another DAX formula as a calculation. 21 at the end is the standard that you want to use. In my case, why 21 is because it's European week numbering when it starts with the days with Mondays. Well, I live in Europe, Latvia. This is how we calculate our weeks. Different standards for different regions. So once I have the week, I'm also going to add the transaction date. And I'm also going to have the units sold. Go, for example, for a weekly view. That's fine. And then I have another calculation, which is week over week. Now it's going to be annoying. So I'm just going to remove years and quarters altogether and months. I'm fixating the chart to be only on weekly basis. There we go. So what a lot of people do is this. They have two different values. One is a whole number, one is a percentage. You can't really put them on the same axis because they wouldn't scale. But what they do is, hey, I'm actually going to make this a line and I'm going to put it on the secondary axis. Theoretically, yeah, it shows you the dynamic of growth. Well, not really just growth, but the dynamic of the week over week trend, right? But the problem with this is that as soon as you enable value labels for this, well, they're going to be all over the place. And you don't know exactly where that position is going to be, right? Sometimes you might be lucky when it's just right on top of the column or right above the column. But what happens in these cases right here, for example, just a prime example, I'm going to have all of them. And I'm going to force the column labels to be outside top because I just want to create these scenarios. Along vertical overlap. So I'm saying that, hey, I want to make sure that I'm always seeing all the labels. You can see we already have built in some mechanisms to cover these, but these are the problems, for example, that you might come across in certain situations, right? So you have to think about, okay, so probably this is not the best approach. What can I do to handle this differently? Do I fixate them in one place? How do I fixate them? How do I look at them, and so forth? There have been multiple solutions to this, right? I just want you to kind of deep diver into your creative side this time. See what new approaches, what interesting approaches you can come up with. Because, like I said, at the end of the day, this is what it's all about, right? Learning, seeing new stuff, seeing new approaches and everything. Uh, what else? For those of you who have already been working with Power BI, you might already know how to do, for example, a week over a week calculation. I'm going to show you one way on how I was creating it when I also started off to use Power BI. Power BI has built in quick calculations. So at the top ribbon, you choose home. I'm going to open up the expanded view right here so you see names. So home, also under modeling, you have it, but most of the time you're just on home tab. Right here, there's a group called calculations. And right here, you have quick measures. If you have premium subscription, you can also try out Copilot. If not, there's ChatGPT that can help you with this. If not any of those, there are some built in ones. Sure, they're not going to cover everything, but there are some ideas that you can tackle or at least look into. What I did is I found the time intelligence block. Okay. Um, I had the necessity to create a month over month analysis. We can see right here, month over month change. Awesome. Select it. Choose the necessary values. So my best base value that I want to compare is going to be the units sold. It might be anything else, might be total revenue, the transaction count, whatever it is. Units sold, date. Well, kind of says it for you. They want the date and the number of periods. So the number of periods defines how many periods are you going to be using to compare things. So in this case, if it's one, it means I'm going to be looking 1 month previous, right? And comparing against the previous month. Click on add. This is the measure that it gives you. You can see it added the two at the end because I already created this. I used this actually as a base today as well because I wanted to showcase the sample. So this is the DAX that it creates. If you just go through it and try to understand what they're doing, it helps you to also understand what's essentially being done and how you could manipulate this. So what's essentially being done is, sure, this is just allowing me to understand what time range is being filtered. This part allows me to calculate the same results for the previous month, and this is what's being calculated at the very end, right? You're essentially dividing the units sold versus previous months and dividing it by the previous month results. You're getting the percentage increase or decrease. But the most important part here is going to be this one, the variable previous month. So the calculation told you that this is going to be for the previous month. I saw that there are weeks. So I wanted to play around with the idea of, hey, what if I look at week over week comparison? So what I just did is I was going through the formula and trying to understand what is being done at what point. So calculate, not touching that. Units sold, I still need to use units sold. Date add. Now date add basically is a function that allows you to move the results to the future or back in the past for a certain amount of intervals for a certain interval. So we're using date add. We're using this on the date column. Cool. This part, for time intelligence, it might be important sometimes. For our calculation, this isn't actually necessary, so you could remove it. It's not going to break it. And then there's this part. The interval is month, and the number of intervals is -1. Since I'm going to be comparing a week, I'm going to say that the interval is -7. So I'm going to be looking 7 days prior. And I'm also going to be switching this one. We can't really use weeks, right? That's not one of the units. But we have days. So I'm switching it to -7 days. Now, if I use this, if I use the timeline, if I'm gonna have the hierarchy, but I don't need the days, I need the weeks as a step in between. Because you can always afterwards also add the day level at the end, but this just needs to be in a chronological order. You can't randomly put these. There has to be logic to this. So week, I'm gonna be using a date here. I'm gonna be using units sold not in the legends, but in series one. Go down to a weekly level. So that's how much units we have. We have units sold month over month 2 is what I just calculated. This is the one I just edited together with you. I'm going to be using this one as, doesn't matter, series 4, for example. But the reason why I wanted to have this is if I go to a full view, we can always close these tabs and so forth. Go for a particular month, for example. And let's see right here, right? Units sold 388 goes to 458. There's an increase of 37.13%. Now, how you check it? The good old calculator. As simple as that, right? That or ChatGPT. I have GPT as well. For these sort of tasks, just use any resource that you have. You don't have to do things by hand. And I'm just going to say percentage increase from 388 to 458. Allow it to calculate. Approximately 18% increase month over month. 37 means I've done something incorrectly in the formula. So once you have that, you can at least go back 388, 458. Should be higher, right? Anyways, so if I have these numbers, if I have the correct number, means okay, have to double check what I've done here in the formula. Maybe I did something wrong. But this is essentially the way on how you can already use built-in functionality, right? You don't always have to create things from scratch. Sometimes you can use already pre-built mechanisms. If you get stuck on something, don't forget that you have an amazing community that can help you as well. You can also reach out to us. We'll try to see what's happening and how we can help you. The one thing that I would highly and just not just highly recommend, but I would say it's mandatory. If you send us questions regarding calculations, please send us the PBIX file. Because otherwise, if you have named the column something else, if you have done something differently in the model, there's a lot of variables, guys. We need to know exactly what you're doing, what exactly you're trying to do, and what exactly is happening, and what's the expected behavior. We need to understand the whole situation to be able to help you, right? So just provide as much information as possible. So these sort of things. You can do this, of course, by hand. You can just see what's the calculation to compare one value versus the other. Implement that within the DAX. You can also use that in different cards, KPI recommendations, and so forth for analysis and so forth. So all that is available to you as well. What other visuals I would probably recommend to use in this report is, well, there is a time, so I would stick to the timeline. That's one of them. Whether it's week over week or month over month analysis, how are you comparing it one against the other? It's up to you. But that's one of the things. Going through the values, if I go, for example, for fact sales, we can see we have the model, brand, storage. All these are different dimensions. Create some sort of hierarchies and allow your users to basically dissect the data. If you have a lot of different dimensions available on the same page, make sure, like I said, that they do not cut off each other or they do not overlap. Because otherwise, you get these sort of results where I don't know, it just seems like it's a waste of space at this point, right? If I would have it like this, if I wouldn't have the brand at the top here and I just have one product, then I don't really have an issue with it. Because sure, the coloring is going to be the same because it's the same manufacturer, but I'm not overlapping with the information. So these sort of things, right? What else? The map visual is another option that I would say is yeah, it's feasible for this data set because we have the location. So we can use the latitude and longitude. We can go, for example, for something like a total revenue, see how this is being spread out, and just think about how you're going to be looking at it and what you're going to be focusing on. Once you see things being spread out, usually the thing that I check is, okay, this is how it looks on a map. Now let's see how it actually looks on the data set itself. So I would probably add country as a table just to see, okay, how many unique combinations of countries do we have there? Okay, there's 4 different countries. Maybe the analysis shouldn't be global because I think you can agree with me, right? If I go like this, there's just a lot of white space. There's a lot of space that is not being utilized properly. So, most likely, what I would do for regional analysis is I would define the entry point. So, the global sales is being calculated on an overview page. Whereas regional analysis doesn't allow you to have a situation where all countries are available simultaneously. So that's going to be a slicer, for example. The slicer is only going to have a single selection. So the user has to pick one, whether it's Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, or Turkey, right? Allow them to focus. And the map looks a lot cleaner as well. Sure, maybe the colors should be changed. Probably want to change the colors because yellow on green and white isn't really noticeable. I don't know, something like purple. The labels, they're being cut off. So what I would do is place the labels outside. Just make sure that the information is understandable. Maybe the clustering isn't even needed in this case. So just disable the clustering if it's so. If you're using the cluster, maybe you want to highlight, for example, what cities are underneath it. So you would put cities in the category and under formatting options, node settings, enable pie charts. So this shows you how many cities are underneath it. A lot of different things that you can do with this. But now, probably, make sure you don't have overlapping colors. So if you're using categories, just go for something neutral in the middle, right? So there's not a lot of overlap between the parts of information. But yeah, I'd say for this one, timeline visual, combo or combo bar, just depends on the orientation of the chart that you want to utilize. Waterfall chart could be utilized also. Map visual, scatter plot, maybe for certain analysis like this deviation from a certain trend or something like that. Yeah, those would probably be the most common ones. All right, we do have a little bit more time left. I just want to be also cautious about your time because, time is precious. So let's go through some questions. I'll try to answer them. Let me remove this window for okay. How to get date hierarchy if not given, and which table should we have the date hierarchy dim or fact table? So for the calculations and within the chart, if you do not have a date hierarchy, you need to create one, right? In this case, if you just have a date, let's say if you just have a date and Power BI, you have disabled the time intelligence functionality and the hierarchy is not being created to you, you just have the date. It means you have to create the hierarchy yourself. Now, the way you do it is multiple versions. You can, of course, first of all, create a calendar table. That's one of the things. The reason why you want to have a calendar table, first of all, is because you can have a lot more information regarding the calendar in one specific part of it as a dimension, rather than, for example, just not enhancing, but expanding your fact table. Because you think about it like this, right? If you wanted to add a year column, that's another column. Month, quarter, week, day, all those are new columns that the model has to render always. If it's a separate dimension, you only take the information for the unique values, not every single duplicate of the value. So a calendar dimension is always recommended. Within it, initially, you just need a date column, which is what you would get regardless. And afterwards, either through Power Query, because Power Query has a lot of interesting features as well, or through DAX and say, hey, this is going to be the year the year element for the hierarchy. You don't need to have a built-in hierarchy. You can just build one yourself. This is going to take a year out of the date. Date, yeah, sure, close enough. Date from dimension date. That's a new column. And if I would want to have this just a year in my timeline, year, let's say I also have the same for week that I showed previously. I have my date and I have some sort of a value. You can see that's it. I can go between these units with no issues. Wanted to ask if it's always important to create a date table. Yes and no. For simple scenarios, you can live without a date table, but it's one of the good practices to always create a dimension for a calendar. The reason for this is, like I said, you might have additional properties that you want to have within that calendar table. Let's say you're not only working with date as such, but you're also creating a separate calculations for different fiscal years. Because fiscal year isn't necessarily connected to an actual calendar year, right? It might start at a completely different point. So you have within the same row the original calendar from the calendar as such. Then you have the fiscal parameters. Then you might have some other modifiers that you have defined, and that is only being kept in the dimension for the calendar, not the whole data model. Not the whole data model, but not in the fact table. The fact table should be as lean as possible. You don't want to enhance it with too many additional columns. The sales data at an individual buyer level doesn't make much sense. Who in their right mind buys 20 or 30 phones at once? I'm almost done with my report. Decided to treat rapid data buyers as a distraction. I mean, random data is random data. But like I said, if these numbers seem completely absurd, switch it up. Create another calculation on how you define the individual buyer level, or think about it like this: the actual buyer is maybe not a no, we have gender and age and everything, yeah, so it's an individual buyer. Or let's think about it like this, right? Every single buyer isn't buying for himself. That's just the contact person for the deal that's being made for this purchase. Basically, that's a sales agent who's buying for his 30 relatives, right? Let's treat it like that. Can we create that hierarchy? You creating a dimension table, then building connections with fact table one to many, further adding columns. Yeah, of course, Mohammed. That's what you can definitely do. Like I said, for example, dimension data, and you can see I'm just adding additional units, and then I'm using the units and the visuals. You can do that. And in the model, you can see these are connected as well. Well, in my case, it's bidirectional connection because of the method that I created it, but you can definitely do it. That's it. Perfect. Managed to cover all of them. All right. So from my side, that would be it for today. I hope it was interesting, and most importantly, it was useful. That you managed to learn something new and useful. If you did, leave a thumbs up in the chat so that I know how I'm doing as well. Because otherwise, what am I doing here? The main idea is to teach you, right? To give you some ideas and inspirations. So if you didn't learn anything new and useful, something's wrong with the session or the way that I went through it. What else? Do not forget, or I would highly encourage you to fill in that feedback form. So on your screens right now, you can actually see a QR code. The QR code takes you to the form. The form is a feedback form. I think we have like 3, maybe 4 questions. But these sessions, or not sessions, these questions allow us to understand how are we doing with the workshops. Do you like them? Do you dislike them? Certain things you want to hear more or less about? So it just helps us to understand whether we're doing what we're doing properly. right? Or if there's something we need to change. If there's something we need to change, please let us know about it. Otherwise, as much as I would love to get into your mindset, I can't do it. Tell us what you're missing, and we will try to adapt based on those requirements. Other than that, I wish you the best of luck in the challenge. If you get stuck on something, don't be afraid to reach out to us. Use the community as your resource as well. And I'm looking forward to the submissions and meeting all of you back for the top five announcement and winner announcement. So, thank you so much for your time. Have an amazing day and talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.